just get started really slowly. Well, so welcome everyone, and especially welcome to Val, you and Jonna and David, who agreed to come all the way from the States and from Finland with various lengths of flying and stopovers and whatnot to be here in beautiful Aarhus this sunny summer day. So we have this boot camp format that we've been working on, or Kat over here has been working on for the past year or so, where we try to bring interesting people together to learn from each other about methods in the fields that the Interacting Minds Center work within. And I'm going to get back to who we are and why we're here, what this place is in just a second. But the whole idea of this format of this, where we're not in a lecture hall, we're in our meeting room, our lunch room, and we're trying to set up a mood where conversations and getting eye contact is actually paramount in the proceedings. So, and we usually have a very eclectic mix of people here. Interacting Minds is a very mixed people bag in the first place, and usually we get everything from practitioners who work in whatever field it is that we're interested in, who have no empirical academic experience whatsoever and just kind of pounced on some big international name or some subject that we're delving into, all the way up to professors from other departments trying to see if they want to work with us or work within the field that we're addressing or something else. And I see a few of each of these categories today, including maybe some prospective PhD students here today. So you should just all be aware that probably no one here knows everything about everything that's going to be said today. Some people might not even ever have heard about, say, structural equation modeling or stealth assessment or quantitative ethnography before seeing our invitation for this event. So everyone is kind of sort of a newbie in the whole thing, in the whole format that we're doing here today. So I'm just saying this to invite conversation and invite a low bar, a low threshold of entry for a conversation all the way through the day. So there are no stupid questions and there are no dumb conversations at all. Usually it's the weird and surprising conversations that we found are the most rewarding in these settings like this. So we have a beautiful program for you guys today. I'm just going to do like a brief introduction. I'm not going to take more than like 20 minutes of your time, and then I'm going to hand it over to David Williamson-Schaffer from University of Wisconsin-Madison. And the speaking order that's here is basically just the order that the abstracts came on the website. So it's not like there is any hierarchy or any deep plan about why anybody is anywhere on this list. We didn't put any like specific minutes and times on it. Each speaker has about an hour for presentation and Q&A, and then we have some leeway for conversation and discussion, and lunch is going to be here, it's going to be on us, it's going to come in somewhere around 12, but we're going to kind of work the program around that basically, based on how the day goes. So we should end around 3 o'clock. I know some people want to leave there, but we're going to stick around, and the speakers are going to stick around before we're heading out to dinner, so there should be plenty of time for kind of the deeper conversations if you want to stay and talk after the official program, okay? So, this is the official IMC Bootcamp Playful Learning 3, the quantitative lenses. When there's a 3 there, it's because we've already done one workshop on the qualitative lenses, and I had a hard time figuring out where I should put David, for instance, in this grand scheme of things. Because we believe that when studying things like play and games and playfulness and gamefulness and learning and all of these things that mesh together in this field of learning through play and studying play and games, it's important to get a fix on many different lenses that you can approach this field through, because it's been approached through so many different lenses over the time. When you start, if you look for play and learning or games and learning on the internet, you're going to find all kinds of different people entering into this very multidisciplinary field with whatever competencies they have. And some of the stuff that's out there is really deep interest in ethnography about how kids learn in natural settings. Some of it's really complicated, huge cohort studies or effect studies trying to figure out what games and play and stuff like that do to different populations. So it's, and some of it's like deeply, very strong, strictly designed neuroscience studies. So there are so many different things going on. So in our bootcamp series, we try to say, okay, let's try to see if we can have a conversation between these different lenses, because we are basically what sometimes we say a post-disciplinary center. We try to break down the boundaries between all of the usual silos that you often find in organizations and institutions like universities, and bring together people from many different fields at the Interacting Mind Center. So we're the Interacting Mind Center for the study of cognition, communication, and choice. And if you just take a moment to consider which fields at a university or which practice frames out there in the real world include some of these things, you'll usually don't find maybe any that don't have some interest in this, unless they're like really highly specified technical fields. So at the Interacting Mind Center, we have a mix of anthropologists, psychologists, neuroscientists, people who are in literacy studies, people who are in language studies, people who are in archaeology, people who are in game studies and learning like me. We have economists, we have the art physicist and biologist. We have many different people who try to converge what it is that they're best at on studying really kinds of interesting questions about what happens when people get together and create something else, be that a social structure, learning, organizations, the economy, anything in that area. So it's like a really big, strange mass of people. But what we usually say is that we're all kind of mixed methods. We're all interested in having conversations with other fields and figuring out if other people know about cool ways of approaching the questions that we usually ask within our field, whether that be cognitive archaeology or the study of games and learning. And we also say that we like to approach things experimentally, which doesn't necessarily mean that everything we do is a randomized controlled trial. We like to be experimental in our approaches to empirical research, and we like to study experiments just kind of as an aesthetic, as a logic of approaching the whole thing that we're doing that we call science. So a very mixed bag of people in the center and in the room. And basically what we think, and we've been thinking for a while, I think that's why Andreas asked me to join him when he started this center with Josh, is that we think that play and learning are really, really strongly intertwined with all the facets that you have of cognition, communication, and choice. There's a lot of playful stuff going on in communication, language games, and there's a lot of choice in play, in games, in game design. There's a lot of cognition all through that spectrum. So we feel that there is this natural link between these things, and we've kind of been prodding at this for a while, mainly me for a long time. And we've been working with some good friends that we have at LEGO for a pretty long time as well, with some of our very good researchers doing some interesting stuff on coordination and neuroscience and social coupling and stuff like that in LEGO building tasks. And after a while, last year, LEGO all of a sudden gave Andreas a call and said, okay, so now we're ready to formalize this relationship. We've been dating for a while, it's been nice, but let's kind of formalize this. So we decided that to go into a project together that LEGO is now funding with us, that we call PlayTrack, which is, there are many different ways of describing this, and we've described it in many different ways in the sort of official program for the research project that goes from now and 5 years into the future. But what I like to think, at least, is that play and learning has been studied in Denmark for a very long time. Some extremely talented people, for instance, at the Danish School of Education, have been working in this field for a very long time, and LEGO has had their hands in a lot of this research and has funded lots and lots of different research. But I think, at least I'd like to believe that LEGO now found that we had some new and interesting ways, not necessarily of doing this in a better way, but at least of challenging the ways that these kinds of studies have traditionally been done in Denmark. So we are heading into a couple of years of trying to figure out how to observe and document both playful learning and the effects of play on people. So this is kind of a space for very open-ended questions, but our main question is, how do you measure play? How do you study play? And how do you study if something that you have that might be a product, that might be a practice setting, that has some kind of playful component, how that stimulates play, how that changes play, and how that changes how play changes people and changes activity and cognition within that field. So that's just my story. I think if you ask Josh, or you ask Kat, or you ask Andreas, who are the other kind of principal investigators in this project, you're going to get a different story, but that's at least my story of the whole thing, and I'm the one holding the microphone right now. So yeah. So I've been working in games research for a long time, educational psychology and games research and motivational psychology. And what I've found, I mean, when I started out in this field, I thought, okay, so at least studying play, studying games, that's kind of tricky, but studying learning, we know how to do that, right? I mean, that's got to be easy because we test learning every single year in every single curriculum area that we have in the Danish schools. So when I did my PhD, for instance, which was on outside education mobile games, I thought, so the easy thing is going to be finding out how to measure the impact of this kind of learning opportunity, because all we need to do is to find the national tests in this area, and then we can import them, we can have the kids do that like pre and post or just post or whatever, and that'll give us a good indication of whether they've learned anything from this pretty complex experience that they were involved in. But what I gradually realized working in that area and on games that I've been building with Mads down here and other people at the physics department for, on one hand, teaching physics, but on the other hand, also leveraging human cognition in studies of wicked physics problems, is that getting people to play games and getting people interested in to understand the subject matter within a game, the stuff that you put in within the game mechanics, tweaking game mechanics to create different effects, and just getting people on board to play games are such a hugely complex field that just doing what you'd usually expect from an effect study in medicine is something that you can do, and it's done, and it's usually very interesting when it is, but the whole field is so much more complex than we usually think. So there are the motivation, there are demographics, there are people's play preferences, there are people's trajectories through a game, there are people's problem-solving strategies within a game. There are all these different kinds of things that will influence how people approach these games. And when I studied that outside education game, for instance, I found out that the main factor, the main thing that affected how kids, on one hand, engaged with that game, and on the other hand, how they took in the information and was able to turn that into kind of traditional curriculum knowledge just after and at a post-test. It wasn't the game that was kind of the magic ingredient. That was the teacher. That was what the teacher did with the game in practice and in conversation around that game. So it's just such a very, very complex field that when we decided that we wanted a boot camp on quantitative lenses for studying play, we also wanted to challenge the traditional things that you expect psychologists, for instance, to do when studying games, and find the most interesting people in the world who I think have challenged the ways that these things are done. So we had the qualitative methods bootcamp with play observation, digital ethnography, and games in the classroom, studying what goes on in a room in these situations. And we have an engagement workshop coming out on creativity and pretense and materiality and other interesting things. And we had the number 2, which was on cultural transmission, so kind of the natural learning that goes on as information, as cultural knowledge, cultural epistemologies are transmitted between people across generations, across great spaces to create what we call culture and cultural practice, which is also a super interesting and a very complicated kind of learning where some very interesting methodological stuff is going on. We have stuff coming up on animal research, we think, on different outcomes, on one hand non-cognitive skills, on the other hand more classical curriculum learning. So we have many boot camps planned, and we're going to do this for a while. So if this is your first time here, we hope that we'll see you again at some point, either at the conferences that we'll have within the play track program or at some of the boot camps that we have for specific things. And if there are people that you think we should contact and see if they want to go, I cold emailed Val Schut, whose work I really admire, the stealth assessment framework for trying to study learning not from games but through and within games as they are being played. And she turned out to be a very, very nice person. and wanted to come here and visit us in Denmark. So sometimes you can just get lucky that you have the interface that you need to bring the right person into the room. So if there is anything or anyone that you're interested in, please tell us, because we're really interested in having these conversations. So today we have some different things going on that challenges, this classical setup. This is what I usually tell people who want to do like gamification studies. They want to make a game and they want some kind of effect assessment. And basically, they just usually need to know that, okay, so you need to have like a pre and a post measure. You need a pre-measure. This is not something that all people consider when they want to study the effect of a game. Sometimes they'll just hand out a survey and say, so did you like it? Or can you do this better now than you could? Or they'll measure people's ability afterwards, something like that. So just having a pre-measure of something is usually one step of the way that people need to be informed about. And also, often when you find these studies, is that you find that if you do anything, this is what Hattie's big meta-analysis on learning, if anything, what that teaches us is that everything works a little bit. Everything seems to have some kind of cognitive and educational impact, but that impact rapidly dwindles over time, and that impact is hugely mediated and moderated by the factors that surround it. For instance, the intervention of a really good teacher. So kind of the staying power of the thing is something that you usually want to measure as well. And maybe you want a control group. These are kind of the classical quantitative ways of going about studying kind of the effects of playing games. But one thing is missing in this picture, and that is these Sherlock Holmesy looking things here. What are they? How do you measure anything in the first place? And that's really usually one of the most difficult things to approach in these situations, because we have measures of intrinsic motivation. I've been using the DC Ryan intrinsic motivation setup for a long time for my own studies, and those are like pretty cut and dry measures of different kinds of motivation that goes into something. But as soon as you go beyond, was this an interesting idea? Was this useful to you? Do you think this was a good experience? And kind of head into some deeper questions about what goes on when people play, what happens when people play, then just finding out what to measure and how to measure it is super difficult, and usually something that has to happen very, very tightly intertwined with the context itself, whatever it is that's going on in that situation. So what do we do when the single outcome hypotheses aren't forthcoming, when you can't just say, so we do this and X happens, people get more healthy, people get smarter, people get whatever. And what if the subject matter is moving really fast? What if it's something like the term gamification, which kind of magically propped up around 2009, 2010, and just spread across the internet, and some researchers just jumped on it really, really quickly and said, oh, we want to be part of this, we want to be part of that conversation. But practice is moving at a pace where we really have to move pretty quickly to join in and to get some kind of data. What if the field is actually a screen or some hardware and some internet? What if it's not something that you can study in a traditional ethnographic sense, or even something that people might be able to self-report in a meaningful way? What if it's not something that we can just observe or ask them about? What if thinking skills are more interesting than curricula? What if the way that the answers come about are actually more important than the subject matter of, say, Newtonian physics, which is one of the kind of the strong points in the whole idea of non-cognitive skills and 21st century skills, that it's not necessarily about the silos that was created in schools at the end of the 1800s. Maybe the way that we solve problems is the way to go in a very fast-moving future. This is one of the really strong central points that I think kind of unifies Val Schutz's work and David Jaffer's work. And what if the problem-solving processes in themselves are more indicative than the outcomes? What if we shouldn't be looking before and after, but during what's produced, what's going on? And again, this is two different things where Val and David has some very nicely related, I think, but also very different, strong approaches to the thing. So we have 4 people as lenses today. We have Valerie Shute from Florida State University, right? It's Florida State, right? Yeah. Who has worked in education assessment for a long time, but has now tried to figure out how can we use games not as a way of teaching, but as a way of assessing learning and cognitive processes. We have David Williamson Schaffer from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. I haven't had the pleasure of visiting in Florida, but I have been in Madison a couple of times, where there is a really nice, strong, bubbling melding pot of different game studies and different educational studies, things going on. And here, David is the Lord and Master of the quantitative ethnography framework. He's been this book is mainly about epistemic games, sort of how games recreate particular epistemic frames to learn within and to learn how to reason within. But the tool that he brings to the table that I think is immensely interesting is trying to move in a direction where we can see the things that are produced within practices like playing a game or working on a project. And then instead of trying to count everything a priori, seeing if we can find some interesting and meaningful way of quantifying these things after we have made sense of them, or as part of the sense-making process, what he calls quantitative ethnography. And then I thought it would be really interesting to bring in Jonna Koivisto. How do you pronounce your name? I'm so bad with.
That was pretty good.
Yeah, pretty good. Okay. And you, Hamari, yeah,
Pretty good as well.
yeah, from the University of Tampere in Finland. I can't pronounce Tampere. I know for a fact.
That was also.
That was also good. Okay, I've been trying for a while now. Because these are two very young and extremely productive researchers in the field of game studies, and I'm amazed that every time I come up with some interesting thing that I'm curious about. So, for instance, the effects of gamification, or how do you measure flow, or do persuasive technologies actually persuade, or something like that. Then I'm going to find out that these guys have beat me to it. They've been there already. They've either done some kind of literature review, managing to round up the research that's there in the new field, and structuring it in a very, very nice and useful way for the rest of us, even if it's a very new field like gamification. Or they've been doing structural equation modeling, just trying to see, so what kind of active ingredients seem to be at play when people claim that something persuades, or that badges will make people, or badges or likes will make people run on a running app or something like that. So, and it seems that you guys kind of have struck a very nice balance of being able to do something that's pretty rigorous and pretty scientific, but still very fast-paced and able to jump on the fields as they're actually emerging, which is something I admire very much and would like to be better at. So that's why I thought that I'd try to ask and see if these guys would come, and luckily you did. So I'm so glad that you're here after all. So these are the lenses that we're going to approach our subject matter of play studies today. So I'm just going to finish up now, but the story that I have about kind of the methodological approach that we have in interacting lines is that on one hand we have the mixed method setup. We like to view things through different lenses, or at least make sure that we have a multidisciplinary conversation going on around the study that we want to do, of anything from decision theory to gamification. To collaboration on building stuff with Lego bricks. And on the other hand, we have this idea that we want to focus on experiments. And there's this idea that experiments are usually something that's either done in the lab as something that's super controlled and very rigorous, or it's something that's done in the wild way, where it's more like, let's try this out, let's do an intervention and see what happens. That's often construed as an experiment of a sort, after all. This sometimes confuses me, because I think of like controlled lab experiments. That's an experiment trying to make a school intervention and seeing what happens. To me, that's not an experiment, but it is, in a way. It's trying to influence the environment and seeing if you can pick up on the effects that you have there, just, of course, in a less controlled manner than you'll do in the lab. And then you often have this duality, which is what mixed methods tries to counteract between the quantitative and the qualitative. And in some of the nice games research stuff, Andreas and I were at a conference where we were asked to be on a neuroscience panel on games, and we all had, everyone who was on that panel had picked this old study of dopamine in the brain during games out, because that's a study that didn't even bother to look at what was going on during the game. All they looked at was changes in areas in the brain that were related to dopamine production. They didn't even tell us what game it was that these people were playing. So the qualitative dimension of this study was completely lacking. Whereas the quantitative stuff was very, very pure and very traditionally scientific. So sometimes there is this span that you need to bridge in some way. So what we think that by employing different methods, and not just trying to say we need something qualitative and something quantitative. That's often what I consider myself sort of a mixed methods expert at this point. And I think that often when people talk about mixed methods, they think we also need to count something, or we also need to head into the field and look or do interviews, something like that. And most of the, for instance, in nursing, most of the studies that call themselves mixed methods are actually survey research that have both some fields where people can type stuff in and then some stuff that they have to take off, and then so you have mixed methods. But to me, you can end up having a very, very nice mixed method study without ever leaving the quantitative side of things, because there are so many different ways of quantifying things that might interact and intermesh in the way that's optimal to study the questions that you have. But often you'll also just need to, just by being there as a researcher, just by having a casual conversation with participants afterwards, you're actually doing some kind of ethnography of qualitative research, and you should be mindful of that. So we think that when you start to break down that dichotomy between the qualitative and the quantitative, you get an optimal position to actually navigate this space instead, where you have the lab and the wild as the continuum that you should really be looking at. So where can we ask the most interesting questions about the subject that we're interested in? For instance, how introducing Lego bricks in free play influences that kind of free play. It can be done in the lab, it can be done in the wild, and what you get out of it vastly depends on how you place yourself on that spectrum and what kind of research methods you bring to bear to observe that, to measure that. That's what our project is really about. So maybe it's as much about being in the lab or in the wild and then finding out whether you're sort of in the high control area or in the more organic low control area. That's at least kind of the model that I'm drawing at the moment. This is kind of a work in progress. I plan to, every time I get to do this and introduce a methods bootcamp, I'm going to do this thing again. I'm going to use the same slides with slight variations, and hopefully there at some point I'm going to be finished with them. So this is kind of my way of experimenting with this story. Does this make sense to you? Is this why you came here? Is this what you want from us? Okay. If not, then yeah. So for true mixed methods research, we need to understand variations and challenges in all the available lenses across the arenas and within the research processes. So.